Okay, we're at the end of Perek Mem Vav. We're up to Perek Mem Vav, Pasuk Lamed Aleph. But first I want to make one comment on the first two psukim prior to that. So Pasuk of Tes has the meeting of Yaakov and Yosef, this Perek Mem Vav Pasuk of Tes. And the other Pasuk says he cried on his Tzavarov. And there are two ways to read this. I forgot who reads it which way, but assuming it says only one person cried, Vayev al Tzavarov. It's a singular. So only Yosef cried. Yaakov did not cry. Why not? Why is Yaakov not crying? He cried, not the other one. So then the next pasuk can be read as an explanation, or Yaakov explaining himself. And Yaakov is saying in Pasuk Lamed, which we'll see is very important for the Hemshech, Yaakov is telling Yosef that I'm done. I have nothing left to live for. I only needed this, and now I'm done. So the fact that Yaakov is not reacting with the same emotion that Yosef is explained by the fact that Yaakov considered himself to now have essentially completed his life, and now he's ready to die. Now Yaakov did not die. In fact, there's some very important things that are going to happen soon. But he said, I'm ready to die. And the fact that he's saying I'm ready to die might be an explanation or a continuation of the fact that he's not acting with the same emotion that Yosef is, because he just needed this. And as soon as this happened, he considers himself to be, his life to be effectively over, essentially over. Okay. And neged this crying, we have in Yeshaya Perek Lamed, Perek to which we keep on returning time and time again in this parsha. There it says, we're going to look more closely at that parsha throughout this shir on these following psukim, but I just want to point at the pasuk Yud Tes in Perek Lamed of Yeshaya, where it says, the nation will live in Tzion, dwell in Yerushalayim, Bachoi lo sivke, no need to cry. You could live in Tzion, live in Yerushalayim, no need to cry. Hashem is going to give you bread, and He's going to take care of you. But lechem tsar umayim lachatz. And as we discussed in the context of previous psukim, Goshen is a place that's in Mitzrayim, but is like Tzion or like Yerushalayim. There's a place in Eretz Yisrael called Eretz Goshen in Sefer Yeshua, which according to the Radak and others is actually the same Eretz Goshen. It means the land of Goshen was on the part of Mitzrayim that was toward Eretz Yisrael and in fact became part of the Nachla of Bnei Yisrael. So either it's literally part of Eretz Yisrael or it's figuratively like Eretz Yisrael because it's the land that Bnei Yisrael lived in. So they lived in Goshen, which is like Tzion in Yerushalayim, and they survived the hunger through relying on Hashem, as we'll soon see, how there was a different way of surviving the hunger than Yosef planned, and that's alluded to in this Pasuk Chaf in Yeshaya there, Lechem Tsar Umayim Lachatz, Hashem will take care of you, even though it's not a lot of bread, not a lot of mayim, that's okay. And no need to cry, the Navi says. So Yaakov here is not crying, and he's going to live in Goshen, which is like Tzion in Yerushalayim. Okay? Shtikol Mayim Ramoska. Yeah.
Are you tying are you relating the Bechia to the Chazal Darshan Bechia with Yosef and Binyamin to the Chorban?
Okay.
So is Yeshaya saying they're not going to cry, meaning that's also crying related.
Right. Very good. Not being in Tzion.
Right.
Very good.
Also, Rashi says on the Yeh place of Aviv and Vayeshev that was talking about Yitzchak. There's something Yitzchak crying for Yaakov.
Right. For Yaakov's morning. Okay.
No, just another instance where Yaakov isn't.
Interesting. Very good. Very good. So that's something to think about. That the crying relates to things being imperfect. Things being imperfect means not being in Eretz Yisrael, going to Galus, Churban Beis HaMikdash. Here we're meeting Yosef, who's the one that led them down into exile, and Yaakov stands for the fact that maybe we don't have to go to exile, and the brothers stand for that. And in fact, they're going to choose a place in Mitzrayim, which is like Tzion, and that's Goshen. So that's like a rejection of Churban. That's what Yeshaya is saying. Yeshaya is saying if you wouldn't need the might of Mitzrayim, then you wouldn't go to exile. So here, Yosef stands for the might of Mitzrayim, and as we discussed in last year, Yosef takes his chariot and meets his father, and the fact that he takes his chariot, that's emblematic of Mitzrayim's power, And Yaakov is doing his thing, which is to be in Goshen, which is not quite Mitzrayim, as we discussed last year. Fine. I don't mean that. I want to go back to. Let's go to the next psukim. So we're up to pasuk Lamed Aleph. Vayomer Yosef el Echov el Beis Aviv Ele v'agidu Lefare. So first, I want to say a word about about Ele. He's going up. Why is he going up? In pasuk of Tes it says Vayal Likras Yisrael of Goshen. He went up to Goshen. So why is it called going up to Pare? So probably because whenever you go to Pare, that's called going up. Because Pare has the king who's Yoshev al Kisoi, like the pasuk says about Pare himself. And the throne, the kisei, is always higher. Raka kisei egdal mimeka. Even Yosef, the kisei is higher than him, and Pare is al hakisei. So going to the king is called aliyah. Okay. Now, notice that he's not speaking to his father. Vayomer Yosef el Echov vel Beis Aviv. He's speaking to his brothers and to the household. Why isn't he speaking to Yaakov? Well, because Yaakov just told him, I'm done. I have no more interest in life. After Yaakov says, I'm ready to die, he can't turn to Yaakov and say, okay, so now let's plan your retirement, let's plan your golden years here in Mitzrayim. Yaakov just told him, I'm done. I have no needs anymore. All I needed to do is see you, and now I could die. So Yosef can't turn to him and say, okay, now let me take care of you, because he doesn't need to be taken care of. So he says, okay, you don't have to be taken care of, fine. But my brothers, the next generation, they do need to be taken care of. So I'm going to go tell Pare, and look, he's going to tell Pare, Achai ubeis avi asher be'eretz Canaan bo'u elai. He's not going to tell Pare, my father came, which is very significant. That his father came is very significant. It's so significant that we'll see he actually did tell Pare that, and he made a whole fuss out of it. But he's announcing, I'm going to tell him, Achai ubeis avi asher be'eretz Canaan bo'u elai, nothing about his father. That's consistent with the fact that Yaakov says, I'm done. So what I want to do is like this. I want to show you the differences between Pasuk Lamed Aleph, Psukim Lamed Aleph through Lamed Daled, which is Yosef telling them what he's going to do. We're going to compare that to Psukim Aleph through Daled of the next parak, where it actually happened, and we'll see there are many differences. And even before the fact that there are differences, the truth is if there weren't differences, you wouldn't have 8 Psukim. You would just have Vayas Cain. Yosef told him, I'll do such and such, and he did it. Or you would just say, Yosef went and did such and such. No. Torah says, he told him, I'm going to do A, B, C, D, and then it recounts the doing it, and it's not A, B, C, D, it's E, F, G, H. We'll see there's many differences. But the very fact that it's repeated right away tells you that you have to notice that there's going to be a difference in what was said and what was done. So let me point out the differences. So far we showed a major difference, which is that he told his brothers, so in Pasuk Lamed Aleph, he said, I'm going to tell Pare, my brothers and my father's family is here. He actually told Pare that his father's here. Avi ve'achai. Extremely significant, unless you think it's not. Saying my brothers and my father's family is here does not imply that his father came. That can mean his father's not here, but the household is here. And then he tells Pare, my father came. Okay. A small difference, but a difference nonetheless. He says E'elev agidu lefare, and then pasuk Parak Zayin begins Vayavoy Vayagid. Vayavoy Yosef Vayagid lefare bayomer. So Vayagid lefare bayomer is like Elev agidu va'omer, but instead of saying Vayal Yosef, it says Vayavoy Yosef. Okay. What did he tell them that he's going to say? And back to pasuk Lamed Aleph, I'm going to say Achai uvesavi asher be'eretz Canaan. So firstly, that itself is an interesting statement. What do you mean Asher be'eretz Canaan? They're now here. So some people translate it that were in the land of Canaan. Okay, but that's strange. Asher be'eretz Canaan sounds like they are in Eretz Canaan. And there's a difference because in Perek Mem Zayin he says Ba'u me'eretz Canaan. Okay. Going back to Pasuk Lamed Aleph, he said that he's going to tell Pare Ba'u elai. They came to me. And when he actually did it in Perek Mem Zayin, he said to Pare, they came from Eretz Canaan, v'hinom be'eretz Goshen. Not they came to me. Yosef is not in Goshen. In fact, the pasuk makes a point of the fact that Yosef is not in Goshen because it says his family stayed in Goshen, and Yosef, by Yeser, Yosef Merkavte to go to Goshen because Yosef was not in Goshen. And yet he tells his brothers, I'm going to tell Pare Ba'u elai, and he actually tells Pare they came from the land of Canaan and they're now in Eretz Goshen. Another difference. Yosef says that he's going to tell Pare, now we're up to Pasuk Lamed Beis, that he's going to tell Paroi, so Yosef tells the brothers, I am going to tell Paroi that you are Rayet Zayin, because you're cattle people, or animal people, whatever Anshe Mikne means, and that they brought everything. And that way, when Paroi calls you and says, Mama Seichem, you'll support that and say, Anshe Mikne Yavadecha, and that way you live in Goshen. But in fact, it doesn't say, when Yosef went to Paroi, does not say that he told Paroi that they are Rayet Zayin. Okay? It doesn't say that. It leaves it out. Pasuk Lamed Gimel, he says that Paroi will summon them and ask them, Mama Aseichem. In the story, Miktzei Echav Lokach Chamisha Anoshim Vayatzigu Lifnei Paroi. Didn't wait for Paroi to call them. Instead, he takes from his brothers and brings them to Paroi. Okay? Those are the difference. I want to point out one other difference, which I have nothing to say about, just to point it out. He told them to say, we were Anshe Mikne Minurenu Va'ad Ata. Gam Anachnu Gam Avisenu. And they said, Re'etzin Abadecha Gam Anachnu Gam Avisenu. They didn't say Minurenu Va'ad Ata. Okay, just want to point that out. And another I want to point out about this being a shepherd, Minurenu. You know who else was a shepherd, Minurav? It didn't really help him out too much, was Yosef. Because it says, Yosef and yet, he is now entrenched in Mitzri society, and he's not living in Goshen. So there's some irony here, that their argument to Paroi is, we've always been shepherds from when we're Narim, and therefore don't expect this to change. That's in contrast to Yosef.
Are you understanding that the reason why Yosef tells them, Yosef says,
right.
Because Goshen is an outskirt.
Okay, right. So there seems to be the punchline is this whole orchestrated thing is so that Paroi should have you live in Goshen. Why do you want to live in Goshen, right?
Or
right.
Why? What's the connection between Kiseras and
yeah. Okay. Right. Not clear. In fact, there's big problems with that because it was Meitav Haaretz. So, like, if Rayet Zayin Atayavas Mitzrayim, first of all, was Goshen desolate, or was it full of Rayet Zayin? But I thought it's part of Mitzrayim. Like, it's very weird, this whole business. If there was no Rayet Zayin in Mitzrayim, Manushach. If they were Rayet Zayin and they lived in Goshen, so apparently it was a normal thing in Mitzrayim, unless all the Rayet Zayin had to go to Goshen. But then Goshen was Meitav Haaretz. So there's real problems. I don't have Meitav Haaretz. It says that in the next parak, Pasuk Lamed Yud Aleph. And
I'm thinking when the brothers speak to Paroi, it sounds like they're saying we don't have anywhere to pasture.
Right.
So let us go to Goshen, almost like
maybe it's a good place to pasture. That could be, yeah.
Versus Yosef's cause to go to Goshen is because it's Seras Mitzrayim Rayet Zayin.
I see what you're saying. Okay, so I see. Right. I see. That's a big difference. I mean, Yosef was saying somehow they'll send you off to Goshen because they don't like you or whatever. And the brothers ultimately said, let's stay in Goshen because it sounds like they're saying it's a place of mirror. Okay. Very good. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. That probably has to do with the fact that the way Yosef presented it to Paroi, he told him they're in lands of Goshen. So maybe there's a default. I don't know. Right? So, okay, that's interesting. It's a big difference. I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that. What I will say has something to do with these problems. There's a lot of problems over here, like the Toyavas Mitzrayim, what that's about. We'll get to that a little bit later. And what does that do with the land of Goshen? Okay, but conceptually, we know it's been established, I mentioned this before, that Goshen is a place in Mitzrayim that is apart from Mitzrayim, and it's more like the land of Canaan. In what sense is it like the land of Canaan? A, it's closer to the land of Canaan. B, Bnei Yisrael lived there, and maybe it was actually part of Eretz Yisrael, ultimately, according to some in Sefer Yeshua. Like I said, there is a place in Sefer Yeshua called Eretz Goshen, the same word. And some people say the same place. And furthermore, we'll soon see that there's a significant difference in how they survived the hunger, but how Bnei Yisrael survived the hunger once they went to Goshen, and how the hunger was dealt with until now. Okay, let's try to bear with me. Okay, I just want to say a couple of ha'aris that don't. Okay, so we pointed out the differences. Now I want to say a few more ha'aris over here. Just some of them will be relevant, and some of them are just points. This pasuk, pasuk Yud Beis, v'ha'anoshim roi etzain ki anshe mikne hayu. So it's saying, it's identifying the people as being mikne people. This expression anshe mikne appears only here in pasuk Lamed Beis and in pasuk Lamed Daled. This anshe mikne, and you have this word anoshim repeated, anoshim roi etzain and anshe mikne. Okay, so what's that? It's like we're telling you something about the people, what they are. Okay, another ha'ara is that Yosef said, I will tell him that you are Rei Tzayin, and you should say Anshe Mikne, Hayu Avodecha. They came in and they said Rei Tzayin Avodecha. Okay, he said, I'm going to tell him that you're Rei Tzayin and you should say Anshe Mikne, and they came in and said Rei Tzayin. I think the pshat is like this. Because Toyavas Mitzrayim Ko Rei Tzayin. Okay, and yet, first we speak this out, and yet Pari said, Im Yodata v'yesh b'hem Anshe Chayil, make them sorry mikne ala shali. So apparently, even Pari is supposed to have some sorry mikne. So is Toyavas Mitzrayim Ko Rei Tzayin, or does he need people to work for him? So say the Mefarshim, I think we're from the Rambam and others, mikne includes horses. And this we see in the end of the parasha. In the end of the parasha, there's a whole focus on mikne again. Perek Mem Zayin Pasuk Tezayin. Yosef told the people to give you mikne. So they brought them mikne to Yosef, and he gave them bread for the horses. So on the one hand, it seems like horses are included in mikne. On the other hand, the pasuk seems to be making a point that mikne is really tzayin and bakar. So there's a little bit of something interesting going on over there.
Also, bakar wasn't included over here. So
Right, right. Here it's all about tzayin. No, but there's also anshe mikne v'tzayinam uvikaram. So here also there is bakar, but they are rei tzayin. So that's not clear b'chlal what that relationship is. We have it also in Dever. Hine yad Hashem hoyo b'miknecha basusim. I think basus says before over there mikne is koilsus. So it goes like this. So Pari says, okay, look, I don't like rei tzayin, but you tell me the anshe mikne. That's something I can work with because there's other things included in mikne. Okay. So it goes like this. Yosef is going to walk into Pari and say they're rei tzayin. So then they could come back and say we're anshe mikne. Because he already knows you're rei tzayin. It's important that he knows you're rei tzayin. I'll tell him you're rei tzayin, you come and say anshe mikne. Ultimately, Yosef did not say that. Instead, he brought them in, and they had to announce rei tzayin. Because the reason why, so I'm just saying, the reason why they had to say rei tzayin, and originally Yosef told them to say that they're anshe mikne, is because originally Yosef was going to tell Pari that they're rei tzayin, so then they could just say anshe mikne. But Yosef didn't, so then they have to announce that they're rei tzayin.
Why do they have to say that?
Because Toyavas Mitzrayim Ko Rei Tzayin. So he needs to know you're rei tzayin, and not just tam anshe mikne.
Because then he'll say stay here.
Right, except then you have your question that if they didn't bring that up, they didn't say, it seems like they were working on the fact that they need mirror. So maybe that's bakar. I don't know. The bakar need mirror. Okay, very confusing, this whole thing.
Sorry.
This whole business is so confusing, yeah.
Could you accept the following reading now that I'm going with this mahal? You should say your anshe mikne. Pause. Why am I telling you to say this funny title of anshe mikne? It's not on Artzkation, it's on why am I calling it this interesting title?
Very good. Very good. Okay, interesting. Yeah, and then maybe also Pasuk Lamed Beis. Yosef is going to say they're rei tzayin, but then he's going to tell Pari the reason why they're rei tzayin is because they're anshe mikne. Not that the anshe tzayin, the anshe mikne. Right now it's tzayin, but it could be fine. Other opportunities will come up. Sorry mikne, right? Yeah. It could be a sar mikne,
Is
right?
rei tzayin a subcategory of anshe mikne, or?
Yeah, that's what I think, but I don't know.
Independent things. So someone could raise sheep to kill them versus someone to raise them for I don't know. So.
I don't know. It's very unclear to me. Very unclear to me because also there's another problem. Unfortunately, talk about this. Like, what is this business of Toyavas Mitzrayim Ko Rei Tzayin? What are you going to do with the sheep? They need shepherds. Sheep need shepherds. So some people say that Rei Tzayin implies that they themselves eat the sheep, or at least milk the sheep. Why? I don't know. I don't know why Rei implies that. So, to your question, it could be mikne. is more of a detached relationship, especially as it relates to Kinyan.
Maybe that's why Goshen was made of hearts, because you had all the sheep walking around there and
Yeah.
fertilizing it.
So it was the opposite. I mean, it was the place for the outcasts, shepherds. Mamela became made of hearts. Okay. So I don't know. I'm very confused over here. There's a lot to think about, to work out. I want to focus on one aspect over here. Okay. Good. Let's go talk about now the differences. Okay. What explains these various differences? Besides the issues we raised that I'm not going to answer, I want to go back to the differences. The differences are, to review, Yosef said, then it says, Vayavoy. Yosef is talking to his brothers and says, I'll tell Pari, my brothers came. He goes and tells Pari, my father came. Yosef told them that he's going to tell him about he's going to tell Pari about their job, and then Pari is going to summon them. Instead, Yosef didn't say anything. Instead, he brings them in. And Yosef said, I'm going to tell them they're my brother, they're in Eretz Canaan and they came to me. And he said, they're from Eretz Canaan and now they're in Goshen. So what explains those differences? So I want to focus on one difference, and I think that difference changes everything. And the difference is that he said, my father. Yosef walks into Parai and says, my father's here. Remember, he never told his father he's going to do that. Why not? Because his father's done. His father's ready to die. And I submit to you that essentially Yosef is actually giving his father a lease on life by giving him a very important role. And look at Pasuk. Let's start with Pasuk Vav, Zayin. I'm sorry, you'll see this in Pasuk Zayin. Vayove Yosef es Yaakov aviv vayamidehu lifnei Parei. Yaakov is absolutely passive. Yosef brings Yaakov and he props him up in front of Parei. He stands him up in front of Parei. So Yaakov is already here. He brought him in and he stood him up in front of Parei. Vayivarach Yaakov es Parei. And this blessing is very significant. Maybe it's the next blessing, Pasuk Yud. I don't know which blessing, but as Chazal say, that this blessing that Yaakov gave to Parei brought an end to the hunger. That's a Sifri. I think Rashi says the blessing was that the Nilus should come up, but the way the Sifri says it was that the Rav came to an end. So the Rav that was supposed to last for 7 years ultimately only lasted for 2 years. Ramban's very unhappy with this, because then it turns out that Yosef's predictions were off. He said there's going to be 7 years of hunger, and there weren't. Ramban's very unhappy with this, but it's very important, very significant that Yosef's predictions and his dream interpretation had an element of falsehood, because it ended up not being true. In other words, Yosef's plan, if there's going to be 7 years of Sava, 7 years of hunger, and we're going to take care of the 7 years of hunger by stockpiling and everything, that's all very nice, great idea. But once Yaakov comes and he puts an end to the Rav through a blessing, through a bracha.
So why is that not the same, like 210 years and 400 years in Mitzrayim?
Yeah.
The 2 years could have been like 7 years. What's the...
Well, I think because no one is saying that the 2 years were in any way like 7. You can do these kinds of... just because those kinds of acrobatics that can be done doesn't mean it can always be done. And I don't think here anyone tries to do it. In fact, the Medrash that says that the Medrash says that these had to be paid up later. The truth is, it says it about the 400 years also. Those kinds of things have to be paid up in other goliaths. Okay. Yeah. So in this case, right, no one's saying that it was because see the thing is like this: Bris Ben Absalom was a nevuah. So okay, it wasn't 400 years. So we interpret the nevuah to fit the 210 years. But to say that Yosef's dream interpretation wasn't completely perfect is l'chera okay. The Ramban has a problem with it. But
What's the problem?
no, because I think he's like assuming it was like a nevuah. I think he assumes it was a nevuah.
And the nevuah we could read into it.
So then you have to read into it, right? No, but then you would have to read into it. So we'd have to, in other words, you'd have to find some answer, or let's say Chazal themselves should address how the 2 years are somehow like 7. And there's work to do. Maybe it can be done, but it should have to been clarified somehow. Okay, so now what's so important over here is that, as I said, Yosef is bringing Yaakov into Parei. Yaakov said, "I'm done," and Yosef was like, "Fine, Dati, if that's what you say, let me just go tell Parei about everyone else. We have to set up the rest of the family." He's not going to tell Yaakov after Yaakov said, "I'm Amusa Apam." He's not going to tell Yaakov, okay, I'm going to tell Parei that you're here. Because Yaakov doesn't need that. He said he doesn't need that. But nonetheless, Yosef does it. Okay. And why does that change everything? So first, let me just tell you a little bit about this, the contrast between the way Yaakov brought an end to the hunger and the way Yosef tried to deal with the hunger. And then I'll show you how it answers all the problems. So going back to that pasuk, Yosef is Yaakov. So the pasuk makes a point to the fact that Yaakov couldn't stand or didn't want to stand because he's done, and nonetheless Yosef brings him in and stands him up. And Yaakov is 130 years old. Contrast this with the pasuk in Pashas Vigash that says Yosef ben shloishim shana be'amdoi lifnei Parei melech Mitzrayim. So Yosef was 30, and he stood in front of Parei. And Yaakov is 130, full 100 years later, and he is stood up. Okay, what's the significance of that? Because to stand in the court of the king, you have to be strong. This is what it says in Sefer Daniel. Sefer Daniel, the youths that were taken into the court of Nebuchadnezzar, Hanani, Mishael, Azar, and Daniel. Much in Sefer Daniel picks up on the story of Yosef, as we discussed in Pashas Miketz, including dream interpretation and other things. And there the pasuk says that in Perek Aleph Daniel that he told him to look for youths. Asher koyach behem la'amoid beheichal hamelech. This is in Daniel Perek Aleph pasuk Dalid. Find young men that have strength la'amoid beheichal hamelech. And then pasuk Yutes, okay, Daniel Hanani Mishael Azar vaya'amdu lifnei hamelech. So you need strength to stand in front of a king, because to stand in the court of the king, you have to stand at attention. Could be stand there a whole day, whatever it takes. You have to be young and strong to be in the court of a king.
It's also you love it, not just
Yeah, exactly. Men shloishim lekoyach, the Mishnah in Avis, and this is the Mukar in the Torah Chsav, because it says v'yosem and shloishim sham ba'amdoi, and compared to Daniel, that's what we need the Yeladim that have the koyach. And the pasuk makes the point that Yosef was 30. Hasn't make that. First of all, makes that point, and then it contrasts it to Yaakov was 130, who Yaakov couldn't stand. Okay, so that tells us 30 is a significant age for being able to stand, having koyach. Fine. Now, why is it so interesting? Because let's contrast what Yosef did and what Yaakov did. Yosef says, "I'm young, I'm strong, I have energy, I have industry, I have good ideas. I'm going to help you manage the impending hunger." How? We're going to make a whole program. I'm going to manage it, the whole thing. We're going to put away a stockpile of grain. Amazing. And then comes Yaakov, and he can't even stand. And he puts an end to the Rav through a bracha, says a word, and boom, it's over. So the contrast is the two ways to deal with this problem of the Rav. There was Yosef's way, and there was Yaakov's way. And Yosef's way is all about koyach, and Yaakov's way is all about Hashem. And Keneged this, the pasuk says, as we discussed numerous times, Perek Kuf Mem Zayin of Tehillim corresponds to this story of Yaakov and Yosef. And the pasuk says, "Loi begvuas asos yechbots, loi v'sheker ha'ishiyotze, roitza Hashem v'sireh v'semachel machastoi." Without going into the proofs, that capital is corresponding to this parsha. The point is, there are two ways to deal with this Rav. One is typified by gvuras asos and shoykei ha'ish, and that's using the might of Mitzrayim, which is symbolized by the sus. And Yosef's youthful vigor, which is symbolized by the Sheikeh Ha'ish, Koyach La'amoid. And that's not what Hashem wants. Rather, that's Yaakov who brought an end to the Rav through hoping for Chesed Hashem. And similarly, in Perek Lamed Gimel in Tehillim, it says, also is a parak that's all about this parsha. Sheka asus l'shua avoiv chayla le'yamalit. Hine ein Hashem alirev l'machem chasda. It's easy to see how those psukim are the same as the ones in Kufam Zayin. So ein Hashem alirev l'machem chasda le hatzl mimavos nasram ulechayoisam barav. So there's two ways to survive a rav. You could have sus and chayil, but that's sheker. The real way is yireov. The ones who hope for Chesed Hashem, those are the ones who are really going to survive the rav. And what does that mean? That means Yosef's dream interpretation, which was utilizing the sus, as in the might of Mitzrayim, had an element of sheker. So I said before, I think it's important that Yosef's interpretation had an element of sheker, because Lemais is sheker sus is shua. So as much as he could foresee the future, as long as he's operating within the paradigm of Mitzrayim and he's utilizing Mitzrayim's strengths, which are typified by the sus and roiv cheloi, there's going to be an element of sheker. And who's going to be saved with the Rav? Yireyav, the one who fears Hashem, Yaakov. Why? Because ultimately, what saved everyone from the Rav was Yaakov. In other words, Yosef had a good plan. We're not impugning his plan. He had a plan. There's going to be a Rav for 7 years, but I would have a lot of food stockpiled. Okay, very nice plan. But it was sheker because you didn't need it. Because ultimately, what saved Hashem what saved the people from the Rav was that the Rav came to an end when Yaakov came and blessed Pari. And then, just a remez, remember Pari said about the brothers in Yodat of Yeshbam Anshe Chayil, they could be sorry mikneh. And some people say it means I know your brothers are Rayetzain, but maybe, and we'll talk about what that means soon, how that means that they're weak. All the brothers are weak, so it's an element of weakness there. But in case some of them are Anshe Chayil, then they could be in charge of my horses. In other words, Pari is going back to the other Mahalach, to Yosef's Mahalach, which is about Chayil and the Sus. Okay, with that we jumped a little bit over there. Okay, so let me explain. What's going on over here. When Yaakov said to Yosef, I'm ready to die, he's basically saying, I'm giving over the reins to you. And that's what he said. As long as I see you, I can die. Which we discussed last week, or maybe two times ago, that Yaakov is very happy with Yosef for doing things his way, as long as Yaakov sees him. Okay, whatever that's a state in pasuk. He's happy with Yosef running things in his way, as long as he sees him. What's Yosef's way? Yosef's way is sheker asush, he's working for Mitzrayim. Yaakov's okay with that. It's not Yaakov's way, but he's okay with Yosef doing his way as long as he could see him. And then he's checked out, he's going to die, and his career is over. Yosef intervenes and says, no, I'm not letting my father sail off into the sunset. I am going to tell Pari my father's here, and I'm going to bring him into Pari, and I'm going to make him do something. I'm going to make Yaakov active in Yaakov's way, which is decidedly not my mahalach. So when Yaakov basically deferred to Yosef and said, now I could die, you're in control, I'm out, Yosef turns around and says, no, I'm bringing you back in. And he doesn't say that to him to his face and says, okay, let me just go to Pari about the brothers. But then when he goes to Pari, he says, I want to talk about my father, and he brings his father in. And by bringing his father in, he's really stepping back. The same way Yaakov said, Yosef, you run things, and I'll step back. Yosef is saying, no, I'm stepping back. I'm going to allow Yaakov to run things his way, which is antithetical to Yosef's way. Yosef's way was to deal with the Rav like a Mitzri would deal with the Rav, like a smart Mitzri, a Ruach HaLekim Mitzri, but a Mitzri, someone who's using the might of Mitzrayim. Comes Yaakov and says, we're going to do this with Yiras Hashem, we're going to do this through a bracha, and that's a different mahalach. Okay. Now, let me tell you, before we get to all the diyukim, let's go back to Yeshaya, Perek Lamed. Firstly, what we mentioned before, that Goshen is the place in Mitzrayim that's like Canaan. So that relates to this. Why? Because what Yosef is doing here, what Yosef is doing by introducing Yaakov, is saying we're going to bring in a little bit of Eretz Yisrael flavor to Mitzrayim. Right? Because Yaakov is going to survive the Rav, not through the might of Mitzrayim, but rather through the Birchas Hashem, through the Yiras Hashem. So that's like an Eretz Yisrael Mahalach in Mitzrayim. Okay? We'll read that back into these psukim soon. But in Yeshaya Perek Lamed, it says like this. Let's see. Pasuk Yutes says, as we saw before, let's go back a little bit. This is about people who go to Mitzrayim and seek refuge in Mitzrayim. This is specifically in times of Chizkiah, where they're trying to make a treaty with Mitzrayim to save them from Ashur. But what the Navi is doing is he's using the story of Yosef and the brothers to draw lessons and to teach something about what's happening then. And the Navi, Yeshaya, is very opposed to this alliance with Mitzrayim. Hashem didn't tell you to do it. Okay. And look at Pasuk Tesvav in Perek Lamed. Ki choy amar Hashem Elokim kadosh lo b'shuva v'nachas tivosheon b'hashkit b'vitcha tia gvuraschem v'lo yavisem. Hashem offered you strength through calmness and security, but you don't want that. You wanted to run on a horse. You wanted the kind of strength that involves external trappings of power, like a horse. Okay, so then you're going to have to run away. Fine. So there was an offer of a kind of strength that's true of vanachas, and that involves hoping for Hashem, like it says in Pasuk Yud Ches, Ashri kol choich Eloi. Okay, and as we mentioned before in Pasuk Chaf, V'nosen Hashem lachem lechem tzar mayim lachatz, meaning if you rely on Hashem, doesn't mean you're going to have a lot of lechem, but you can have what you need. So it's a different kind of mahalach where Hashem takes care of you. It could be the bare minimum, but you don't need all the power. Same way you don't need the sus, you don't need so much bread. Okay, fine. And then Pasuk of Gimel, it's going to rain. And your cattle, your cattle are going to graze, and it's going to be very, I don't know what a car means, a plain. Okay, and what's alafim? Oxen, I think, and the donkeys are going to eat azasot bread, azasot kind of mixed up hay, whatever it is. Okay, so what's the pasuk saying? The pasuk is saying that your animals are going to graze happily, and your animals grazing happily and being sated as a mashal for you relying on Hashem b'shuva v'nachas. So what we have over there is that a mashal for us getting from Hashem what we need in a way that gives us shuva v'nachas is the fact that animals graze. That's how animals graze, b'shuva v'nachas. They don't need a lot of food. Give them what they have, and they're happy with that. So going back to our parsha, and that's like living in Tzin and Yerushalayim. Going back to our parsha, where they're going to be in Goshen, which is like Tzin and Yerushalayim. So Yosef says they're Anshe Mikneh, they're Royei Tzayin. It's like identifying them with the Tzayin. Same way Tzayin want Shuva V'Nachas. These are Shuva V'Nachas people. These are not Sus people. These are not like Mitzrim who want a lot of power and a lot of might and a lot of noise. These are sheep people. I think that's why it says Anshe Mikneh. Anshe Mikneh means he's identifying them with the Mikneh. Same way Mikneh all they want is to be calm. They don't want to run around. So too, those are my brothers alike. Okay. So now let me explain what's going on here. Let's go back to all the diyukim. Yosef says, I'm going up to Pare. Why is he going up to Pare? Because Pare is al hakisei. And that kisei is over Yosef, rak hakisei egdal mimeka. Okay? But ultimately, Yosef comes in and says, I want to bring my father here. Is the kisei higher than Yaakov? That we don't know. That it never says anywhere. That Yosef, as great as he was, the kisei is higher than him, that's very explicit. But once Yosef brings in a new thing, he's going to bring a new paradigm to Mitzrayim. And that really belongs someplace else. It's really Eretz Yisrael. We're going to transplant Eretz Yisrael into Eretz Mitzrayim. And that's symbolized, typified by Yaakov. Yaakov is Pari his king? Is Pari over Yaakov? No, maybe Yaakov is the equal of Pari, therefore by Yahweh.
And on his deathbed, stood up for Yosef.
Right.
So wouldn't that show subservience?
Vayishtachu Yisrael v'Hashem they bowed, yeah.
So I'm saying, wouldn't that show if he's under Yosef?
Yeah, I don't know. Interesting question, right? Someone's been daik over here. I forgot who. Ben Ezra. The Yaakov comes to Pari and doesn't bow. It doesn't say he bowed. It's an interesting deal. That it doesn't say he bowed. It goes into the king to say he bowed. Okay, it's a good question. Okay, now, of course, the whole time I'm talking about why he said Avi instead of Achai. What about that? He said Asher be'eretz Canaan ba'u elai. That's what he said he's going to say. Instead, he said they came Eretz Canaan and they are in land of Goshen. Because originally the message was not that they took a place in Mitzrayim and they made it into Eretz Yisrael. That's not what Yosef was coming to tell Pari. Because that's what Yaakov stands for. Again, to be 100% clear. When Yaakov said, Amusa Apam, you're in control, that means that Yosef could run things his way, and Yosef running things his way might mean, as far as Yaakov is concerned, might mean that in Mitzrayim, we do like the Mitzrayim. In Mitzrayim, we do like the Mitzrayim. We're not trying to make a little Israel in Mitzrayim. That's what Yaakov stands for. And I'm done. Yaakov's Mahalach is done. Now Yosef is taking over. But Yosef says, no, your Mahalach is not done. I'm going to transplant you and your whole Mahalach into Mitzrayim, and that's what Goshen is going to be. So he walks into Pari and says, not that they are Be'eretz Canaan, but they come for a visit. They're Me'eretz Canaan, and they're here now. They're no longer in Eretz Canaan. If they're from Eretz Canaan, why are they here? Because they're in Eretz Goshen. They took a place here. They're going to make it like Eretz Canaan. So that's why he changes that also. Okay. And then let's go back now. Let's go. What's the other question? Originally, he said Pari is going to call you and ask you what you do. And here it says, Pasuk Gimel, that Yosef goes and is active about it. Who are these Miktzei Echov? Chazal say Miktzei Echov means from the weak ones. Miktzei means from the edges. From the weak brothers, he dafka took weaklings. Okay, Now, I think, like a lot of times you find this in Chazal, by the way, that once you see the bigger picture, you realize that Chazal are not even really telling us the real source, a better source. Because mikzeh, there's other places in Tanakh where mikzeh doesn't mean weak. And let's say the Balei Pshat over here don't follow this Chazal, that mikzeh means the weak ones. Mikzeh means representative. Vasepes Chazal saying that means weak ones. But once you realize that Vayamidehu about Yaakov is dafka that Yaakov was 130 and weak. And here also it says Yosef took his brother's Vayatzigim. Okay, Vayatzigim is not the same as Vayamidehu. Vayamidehu means he's not even standing and Yosef was holding him up. Vayatzigim could mean he presented him. But in terms of the context, he takes his father and stands him up. He takes some of his brother's Vayatzigim. And what's he trying to do with his father standing him up? He's saying, I'm the strong guy and that's what I stand for. But you should know, my family is very different than me. My father's very different. My father's a big tzaddik. He doesn't have any strength, but yet he's going to do something without any koyach. So similarly, when it says he took his brother's vayatzigim, we read it the same way. And then we read, he took 5 of them. Why did he take 5 of them? Because originally he said, Paro's going to call you and say, but now he's trying to do a whole shtick of Torah. He's trying to show Paro, my family is a bunch of lemelach, a bunch of weaklings, very different than me. They do things in a very different way. They rely on Hashem. They're big Bali B'tach and they rely on Hashem. They have a different mahalach, and it's soldik mahalach, which they want to bring here and go to Gaishim v'chulu v'chulu. So that's why he selected 5 of his brothers who would be the best representatives of this. The 5 brothers who will vayatzigim, which is almost like vaymidehu, even though it's not quite. So that's why Chazal say mikzeh Yaakov means the weak ones. Fine. And Pari says, okay, I'm very impressed with your weak family, and they're all Bali B'tach. And im yadat v'yesh b'manchei chayil, in case l'maisa they are Anshe Chayil, then let's go back to the Soy Miknash Ali. But really, Sheka Soshes were Loyamalet, and they're coming here to do something new.
Even though it's abhorrent to the Mitzrayim.
Even though what?
It's abhorrent to the Mitzrayim to have...
So let's talk about that abhorrence. What's your question? What's your question? Speak it out. I understand the question.
I mean, it's not really a full-fledged thought, because obviously there's Rei Tzayin, which doesn't necessarily equate to Anshe Mikneh.
Okay, but let me hear, what was the thought? That what? I'm trying, where's the contention?
Again, it's not necessarily the case, but if there's Rei Tzayin in Paro's flock or his herds,
right,
then if it's abhorrent to the Mitzrayim, first of all, it's a couple things. Why does Paro have him? Because
right,
he can do what he wants, but
right,
why would they?
Right, that's a problem. Yes.
Or he has his flocks in the outskirts as well. Right,
that could be. Some people say that, but it's. I didn't see a very satisfactory one. The most satisfactory thing I saw was crazy. I don't know the history of this. There's some sort of history, apparently. I'm not sure if it's still considered the most current scholarship, but this was someone writing, I think it's like in the 1800s, this person. Ganze Maisa goes like this, that Mitzrayim was not ruled by Mitzrayim. The Pharaoh was from the Hyksos, and they themselves were shepherds. You know this Maisa? So Pari himself was not a Mitzri. He was from the shepherd Chaver. And Toyavas Mitzrayim was actually very impressive. Like, oh, you're also shepherds like me. I don't know if it's right, exactly. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit about this Toyavas Mitzrayim. Shtickle derech drush, but it's emes pshat. I mean, it's emes and drush, whatever. And what I'm saying is, we still have a lot of problems that we asked, and I'm not answering them. But I want to show you one aspect how this whole business of Toyavas Mitzrayim ties in to what we're discussing till now, which is that, number one, Yosef is introducing these people as weak people, dafka weak people. My father's old and weak, and my brothers are also weaklings. And as we mentioned briefly before, that he's identifying them with the sheep and the cattle, and he's saying they're Anshe Mikneh, they're Anoshim Arayet Zayin, so it's like makes you think, oh, just like sheep, Mikneh just want to be calm, so too these people. I don't want to show you in Yeshaya Perek Lamed and Lamed Aleph how this has to do with the Toyavas Mitzrayim. Yeshaya Perek Lamed Aleph has an amazing metaphor. Okay, the Perek begins again. The Navi is upset at those who go down to Mitzrayim LeEzra and they rely on Susim instead of relying on Hashem. This is the big theme. Again, he uses Yosef, and he's upset that Yosef went down to Mitzrayim, and Hashem never told him to go. Similarly, you in the times of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, don't go down to Mitzrayim for help. Don't rely on Susim, rather rely on Hashem. Pasuk Gimel in Perek Lamed Aleph. Mitzrayim Adam v'loy El v'suseim basa v'loy ruach. Amazing. Mitzrayim is man and not God, and their horses are flesh and not spirit, and therefore they're all going to die. Daik. That the Mitzrim held that they were gods, we know that already, Parah says, right? And they're gods and their horses are spirits. If they're gods, their horses are spirits. Okay? So we know something about the Mitzvah's relationship with animals. We know something about it. They deified, here it's Mam Shema, they really deified or spiritualized at least their horses. And we also know that they had this thing with Tzayin. Okay? Now the next pasuk is a shocking metaphor. And this is about the destruction of the armies of Sancheir. They wanted to make an alliance with Mitzrayim to protect them from Ashur. Ultimately, they were saved from the armies of Sancheir with a miracle, and as we know, fine. And listen to the mashal that the Navi says. Hashem told me the following. If you have a lion and he has teref, okay, so a lion takes a sheep and he's sitting there roaring and he's holding the sheep in his claws or whatever and he's roaring over his sheep. All the shepherds come like, oh, we have to save the sheep from the lion. So they all start screaming at him. He doesn't care. He's sitting there roaring over his sheep. He doesn't budge. You hear this mashal? Just like a lion doesn't budge from his sheep that he ripped, that he's now going to consume, and all the shepherds could come and try to hit him, and he doesn't care. So too Hashem is going to be over Har Tzion. Doing what? Protecting it, like the next pasuk, Yogan Hashem Tzavakis. So Hashem is going to protect Har Tzion like a lion protects its prey. What does that mean? That means we are the prey of Hashem. You know why Hashem protects us? Because we are like the sheep to the lion, right? Like imagine, how's the tune go? Kiata the lion, and we are the sheep. That's Mamash Navi saying. What do you mean? What, Hashem eats us? And look at the next pasuk. The next pasuk is a remes to Pesach. Pasayach v'himlit. It's also happened on Pesach, right? Pasayach v'himlit. The what? Hashem jumped over the batim. So now Bekitzer Nimritz. I'll tell you the word Bekitzer Nimritz. Hashem jumped over the houses that had blood on the doorposts. Okay? That means Hashem protects those who are his teref. See the mashal? Those that will die for Hashem. The mashal of the blood on the doorpost is, it's like we are willing to die for Hashem, so Hashem protects us. Okay. It says in Parshas Achrei Mois that you must put the blood on the Mizbeach. If you don't, dam shafach. The pasuk in Purusha pasuk. It's like murder. If you eat an animal and don't bring it as a carbon, it's like murder. That's what it says in Parshas Achrei Mois. That changed, but in the Mishkan, you have to bring everything as a carbon. Ki nefesh habasar dam hu. It's like he committed murder. Okay? Now, so you have to bring it to the Mizbeach. And so what do we have so far? We have that bringing blood on the Mizbeach is what allows us to eat meat. Otherwise, eating meat is like murder. Okay? We have that the Mitzim had this thing against meat eating, and some say it's meat eating. We have that the big thing when we left Mitzrayim is to eat meat, eat a sheep, but also to do a sort of zrika. And we have this pasuk in Yeshaya that says that the Mitzim consider their horses to be like gods, or like spirits, because they think they're gods. And the way we're protected is like a lion protects its prey. So I want to tell you what that all means, Bekitzer. It's something very special about a human being, right? That we know. It's Tzelem Elokim. Okay. So what about the human being is special? The Mitzrayim hold they are gods. Are they wrong? Well, we know man is Tzelem Elokim. So what's the mistake that they're making? They're not Yirei Hashem. In other words, they think that the body of a person is like God. I'll say it in a short way. They think that the human body is like a god. If the human body is like a god, then what's an animal? It's also a shtickle god. He's a ruach. Right? Because if what makes you something special is the body, so an animal also has a body. So this is the mitzvah shita. Mamela, they're gods, their horses are ruchos, they don't kill sheep, they don't kill horses. There's deification going on all over the place. Say that.
Veganism.
Yeah, but a veganism coming from the fact that everything's special, right? Like, again, this veganism has this pasuk in Achrei Mois, dam shafach, killing an animal is like murder. Why is killing an animal like murder? because why are you better than an animal, right? So you value a person, okay, so value an animal too. That's the mitzvah shita. Now, what do? We say like this. What does the pasuk say about that? Lo b'gvuras hasos yechpatz. Hashem is not interested in animals. So what is he interested in? In other words, what makes a person better than an animal is that he fears Hashem. Tahainu, the very fact that we're willing to die for Hashem is what makes us better than the animal. So because we put the blood on the mizbeach, which indicates that we're like Hashem's teref, that we're willing to sacrifice ourselves, therefore we eat the meat. And that's what makes us different than the mitzvim, because the mitzvim are gruas asus shoykeh haish. They think that it's the flesh, the shoik and the sus. They think that's what Hashem likes. In other words, that's what's choshev, that's what's divine. If that's what's divine, then you can't kill animals. But really what's divine is yiras Hashem, a non-tangible thing, a non-physical thing. And therefore we eat meat, unlike the mitzvim, because we are better than the animals. Why are we better than animals? Because we recognize that that our guf is nothing like an animal. So in other words, in short, something special about a human, what is it? If it's that he's stam is a nice body, so horses have that as well. Maybe not the same thing, but they're on the same level. But if what's special about a human is that he's Yireh Shamayim, Yiras Hashem, then it's dafka not the body. It's that he's willing to sacrifice his body. So then he's takum better than an animal, because animals don't have that. Animals are just eaten up. Animals don't sacrifice themselves. They just are killed. So basically what the Navi is saying, and he's taking this from Pesach, is that what gives us the schus for Hashem to protect us is the fact that we're willing to die for Hashem, and Hashem protects us, because like a lion protects that which he wants to kill, Hashem protects. You know why Hashem protects us? Because we're his korban, and he likes korbanis. So there's a paradox over here. Hashem needs korbanis. So you make yourself Hashem's korban, that's Hashem protects you. Why am I telling you all this? Because Toyavas Mitzrayim Roed Tzayin and Shechting Toyavas Mitzrayim and all that, which is the Korban Pesach, is that Mitzrayim, is that what? Is that we have this mihalech that we are like sheep. We are like Hashem's sheep. So that's Anoshim Roed Tzayin and Anshe Mikneh, that we are weak. We are dafka, reliant on Hashem. And this business of we're reliant on Hashem, and therefore we don't, and therefore we have a different yachas to animals. That is the key difference in us and Mitzrayim that we then bring out by the Korban Pesach.
Is this the year they made the Korban Pesach referring to? Chizkiah made the Korban Pesach?
I don't know. Yeah, it was then at the same time? Huh. But they made the Pesach, yeah? Really? It was also the beginning of his reign, because it was the tumba and they had to push it off. Okay, right? So that's, I just want to make sure I made that clear. I had that clear? That the Toyavas Mitzrayim Roed Tzayin means Mitzrayim has different yachas to animals, and the different yachas to animals is they consider themselves to be El, and they're gods, and therefore they consider their horses to be Ruach, and really, which means to say they consider the human body to be Choshev. Really, we don't consider ourselves to be gods because we sacrifice ourselves in front of Hashem. That's why it's Hashem Yisrael. And that very sacrifice that we give to Hashem is what makes us better than animals. That's what the Navi is saying, because then Hashem protects us because we are sacrificed to Him. And that's why we eat animals. If we wouldn't bring a korban on the Mizbeach, then taka, we would agree to the mitzvah that killing an animal is wrong. And this is all coming to a point in this parsha, because here Yosef is introducing to Pari his brothers who have a very different approach to power. His father, Be'ikr, his father and some of his brothers, different approach to power, and they're reliant on Hashem, like animals are reliant, and therefore he says, Anshe Mikneh.